Prologue. Where the virus came from, no one knew. From dark, deepest space, germ warfare, or some nation's scientific experiment gone horribly wrong. Only an intensive inquiry could answer that. But there was no one left to hold such an inquiry. No adults, anyway. And the children left behind were too busy surviving to worry about what had plunged them from a sophisticated high-tech world into a primitive hell of anarchy, confusion, danger, and fear. With no adults to guide, rule, or protect them, the children of the world were on their own. Their task, to build a new world in their own image, whatever that image may be. Chapter 1. Bray gazed down at the devastated city lying 10 stories beneath his feet. He ran his fingers through his long brown hair, distractedly, hardly able to believe his eyes. How could a thing so small, invisible to the naked eye, have destroyed a world many trillion times its own size? He didn't have the answer to that, the riddle of the virus. But the facts lay all around him, unavoidable, unbelievable. Vivid flames, licking from the shells of a dozen blazing buildings, sent acrid, blue-black smoke pouring unchecked into the cloudless sky, blotting out the morning sun. The remnants of the once proud city, gutted tower blocks, burnt-out vehicles, paper, plastic, glass, and concrete debris, abandoned looted goods, and the occasional rotting, rat-eaten, fly-infested corpse were scattered in the streets and alleyways below. The whole city resembled a scene from an apocalyptic virtual war game, or a vast art installation created by a crazed, psychopathic genius. Maybe it had been. Maybe someone was responsible for this chaos. But that question was for the future, if there was one. The crucial question now was how to survive. He was a tall, leanly muscular youth who wore his mix of plainsman and eco-warrior clothes with ease. A green feather hanging from the long plait of hair to one side of his face echoed the Native American Indian, whose traditions and lifestyle he deeply respected. A tradition so alien to the mayhem stretching away as far as he could see. The handsome face reflected deep despair as his eyes roamed the wasteland that had once been his city. The place where he was born, raised, and happily went to school, and where, if he was careless, he could soon die a brutal early death. He shook his head to banish that morbid thought. He couldn't let that happen. He had to survive. He'd promised her. As he watched, a lone, ragged figure sprinted across the littered avenue far below him, weaving through the debris, looking over his shoulder in blind terror. Then he heard it, the piercing whoop, whoop, whoop of a police car siren approaching. Despite himself, he smiled at the irony. There was no law and order here. Not anymore. It was time to go. Foolish or not, he'd made her a promise. Chapter 2. Amber skated nimbly around the blackened carcass of a school bus, which lay on its side at the top of the alley. It was essential to keep to the warren of alleyways to avoid being spotted. There was no telling what murderous eyes were roaming the city, looking for easy prey. Her diminutive companion, Dal, scurried after her, a little out of breath. "Not so fast, Amber," he called to his pretty companion, who, though they were the same age, was at least a head taller. "My legs aren't as long as yours." "We have to get clear of the city before nightfall, Dal. It's too dangerous to hang around." They'd been travelling for over an hour from their homes in the once cosy suburbs to the east. They were heading towards the lush countryside to the west of the stricken city, but despite their rollerblades, progress was slow. Every corner held potential danger, the spectre of a lone maniacal killer, or a violent gang of feral youths looking for fun. In the distance came the wail of a police siren, a familiar sound that once gave reassurance, but now bred instant dread. Dal glanced at Amber. "What are the locos doing in this sector?" Amber shrugged. "Sunday afternoon drive?" Despite the irony, her expression beneath the war paint was grim. Like many of the kids left in the city, she had taken to wearing the paint as a form of protection. It was a sign that was meant to say, "Danger, keep away." But if anything, the black-shadowed eyes, the flame-red cheeks, and diagonal slash of green across the forehead emphasized the young girl's beauty and vulnerability. Still, it gave her reassurance. And in this world, you grasped at any straw you could find. "Is it Sunday?" Who knows? Dal looked at his friend. From the day he had set eyes on her, Amber had always been beautiful to him. First, as a fresh-faced, high-spirited schoolgirl, and now with her painted face, knee-length black leather coat, rollerblades and her long dark hair tied in tight blonde knots around her head. She was his Amazonian street fighter. He worshipped her, but knew she was far beyond his reach. Her little Asian friend, who she had protected from his first days at school. Listening to the approaching siren, he dreaded to think of Amber falling into the hands of the Locos and their terrifying leader, Zoot. There were rumors, stories that woke him in the dead of night in a cold sweat. True or not, he didn't want to hang around to find out. "Let's go, Amber." But she wasn't listening. Her eyes were staring from the alley into the avenue beyond, standing in the middle of the deserted, debris-strewn road, transfixed by the now almost deafening whoop-whoop of the siren, was a small girl clutching a teddy bear to her chest. "They're going to get her," Amber gasped. Before he could stop her, Amber shot from the alley in the wide open space of the avenue. "Amber!" Dal's scream was lost in the wailing siren as the police car with its fearsome occupants swooped around the corner.
Chapter 3. The four teenagers waited nervously in a burnt-out railway wagon on the fringe of a vast deserted rail yard. The leader, Lex, the hard-faced, leather-jacketed youth with long black hair and war paint like a Sioux warrior, hung on to the edge of the carriage, scanning the yard impatiently. "Where is he?" asked Xandra anxiously. She was a pretty girl. She looked conspicuously out of place in this bleak environment, dressed in a riot of colored furs and feathers, her bright blue and red hair held in place with flowered hair grips. "Maybe you got it wrong. Are you sure this is the meeting place?" "Quiet! I'm thinking," Lex snapped. "Yes, Xandra. Let the man think," Glenn sneered. "If he can't think, he can't come up with one of those brilliant plans." Glenn was cursing himself for letting Lex talk them into this crazy meeting. They'd been doing all right on their own, scavenging this lawless city. He, Lex, and Ryan were a formidable fighting force, urban warfare guerrillas. They'd been successfully intimidating the city's waifs and strays for food and evading the bigger gangs since the adult world collapsed. Joining one of the dominant tribes was a gamble. The tribes were all volatile, given to outbursts of unprovoked violence against strangers or even their own kind. He should have stood up to Lex, but that would have meant taking him on, and Lex was a mean street fighter. Lex was mean, period. He didn't like or trust him. "I don't like it here," whined Xandra. "Out in the open, anything could happen. Shut up, the both of you. Zoot'll keep his word," Lex insisted. "Where is he, then, the legendary leader of the Locos?" Glenn taunted. "You hear the sirens?" "Siren?" scoffed Glenn. "That could be anyone. The demon dogs, the roosters, any other gangs. This sector's a war zone." "The whole city's a war zone, in case you hadn't noticed," Lex growled. Despite his show of confidence, a worm of concern was gnawing inside. Had his message got to Zoot? Was this a setup? The Locos were the most feared of the city's tribes, violent and unpredictable. They were the top dogs, and Lex wanted to be there, at the top, where he belonged. There was no future for the little group going it alone any longer. Sooner or later, their luck would run out. But was Glenn right? Had he led his little band of followers into a trap?
Chapter 5. The steel-grey van with smoked black windows crested the hill of the exclusive estate, its loudspeaker blaring the message being repeated all over the city. Code 1, civil priority. Isolation now in effect. To avoid the risk of contamination, stay indoors and await further instructions. As the van rolled by with its grim message, Trudy stood in the lounge with her anxious parents, watching the grave television announcer take up the theme. Authorities are appealing for calm throughout the evacuation process. All children under the age of 18 should report to their local sector for transportation. Trudy grasped her mother's hand. "I don't want to go. I don't want to leave you." "It's too late for us, Trudy," her father said sadly. "You have to accept that." "No!" "You have to save yourself, for your mother's sake." He cradled his daughter's head in his arms, his voice breaking. "And mine." "No! No!" she screamed. Before Trudy's frightened eyes, her parents' faces began to dissolve, transforming their features into hideous, ghostly images that swirled around her like echoing screams. She sat bolt upright with a start, her body cold with fear. She was lying fully clothed in the makeshift bed. They had both decided it was safer to sleep in the lounge so they wouldn't be trapped upstairs if the roaming gangs arrived, and would stand more chance of escaping. She turned fearfully as the front door opened and a figure entered. "Oh, Bray!" Bray threw down his rucksack and went to her. "What is it?" "I had the dream again," she sobbed. "The nightmare. They were here, Mom, Dad, in the house, like it was yesterday. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to leave them. But there was nothing I could do." Bray put his hand to her chin tenderly and turned her face towards him. "Trudy, there was nothing anybody could do." She leant her head against his shoulder, burying her face in the warmth of his jerkin. "Bray, I'm so frightened." He put a reassuring arm around her. "Trudy, we have to go." She looked up sharply. "What?" "The gangs are getting closer. I saw the roosters. They could be here any time. We're not safe here." She looked at him through tearful eyes. "We're not safe anywhere."